Hello everyone. As you know, Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 released just a few days ago, as of recording, and I think everyone can agree that the next two chapters that we've waited 4 years for were absolutely fantastic. They were definitely worth the wait. However, they definitely left me, and many other people, once they finished it, with the realization that it didn't make any sense, at least in a few parts of it. For example, everyone thought, oh yeah, this is the night, but has anyone really stopped to think about how the frig Death became the night? I'm sure a lot of people have, but the question itself doesn't seem that obvious. So, here I have 6 theories that I have made in an intent to answer 6 different Deltarune related questions that the next 2 chapters have either completely made or expanded upon. So, without further ado, I should say that there will be a massive spoiler warning in this video, because I am going to not only assume that you've played Deltarune 3 and 4, which you should have, they released like 2 weeks ago, what are you doing? Or that you have been a part of the community for a long time, so even some minor things like unused bits of dialogue in the code I might bring up, just because to me, they seem normal, and I know to a lot of the people that might be watching right now, they're not, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people just came into the community. But anyways, an example of a major spoiler that you might want to avoid is this. So anyways, if you are completely sure you are fine with spoilers or you have played the games, let's get into it. So, question 1. What are the deal with the Titans in the depths? Because sure, Rouse did explain what the deal with darkness was, to an extent. It has actually gone against a lot of what our previous interpretations of darkness were. For example, we thought that there were things like darker dark worlds from the phrase darker than dark, and that those were things like the depths and such. However, Rouse has actually said that darker than dark just means a normal dark world. He said that it's taking away light that wasn't even there. And we also know that too much darkness falling creates a titan, instead of what our previous assumption was that it was just the roaring. So you can see the Gaster face in this if you look hard enough, which I hate. So, I should say, the depths, to those of you who don't know, is a very popular fan theory before the chapters 3 and 4 came out, that basically said that, if you will avert your attention to my really cool diagram right here, you have the light world on top, right? It has positive light, all this cool stuff. And then below it, you have the seal to the depths. The depths is made out of darkness or negative light or what have you, and they are separate until you make a dark fountain, which flows the darkness from the depths up and makes a dark world. I think this was a really good idea, especially because it explained why the light and dark were in balance if even one dark fountain was open. But a lot of people, after chapters 3 and 4 release, thought that the depths were untrue because we had very little evidence for them. We actually got a few of our pieces of evidence debunked, but I would like to argue that we have more evidence than people think we have. So here are new evidence for the depths. So if you will divert your attention to this very low-res image that I got, somehow, probably from Google, it says, a world basked in purest light, beneath it grew eternal night. I think the world basked in purest light is obviously the light world, but beneath it grew eternal night sounds like it's referring to more of, like, the depths, because eternal is not how I would describe a dark world. The few dark worlds that we've seen so far got almost immediately closed, and 2, as well, eternal night has a very dark tone, whereas dark worlds generally have a very lighthearted tone. Right? Like, even for the majority of the Chapter 4 Dark World, which is by far the hardest we've seen, it's like Susie and the gang and Rouse and stuff were having a pretty good time. They were not taking too long, as it turns out. But also, if we look at this image over here, it says, "If fountains freed, the roaring cries, in titan shape from darkened eyes," which, the wording freed is very interesting, because it implies not created, but taken from somewhere. Freed darkness from the depths. So that is very, very interesting. We also know that darkness is made of taking away light that isn't there. Yeah, I think the exact wording is, what if you took away the light that wasn't even there, and we got darker than dark from Rouse? And depths would then have negative light to oppose the light world's positive light, akin to how some people think that we have a regular matter universe and then an antimatter universe. I think that would make a lot of sense. So we just have these two opposite dimensions here. And of course, that is how dark worlds are formed, by channeling the anti-light from the depths. So, now that we've gone over what I think darkness itself is, let's think about the Titans. So we know that they're not made from the roaring, they're just made from when darkness runs wild, which is a bit weird, because it almost implies that the darkness itself has a sort of maliciousness. But anyways, they are gigantic. We know that a one that was just hatching was already titanic. They're made of darkness. We know they have no sentience. They exist just to destroy. And we know that the Titan's shaped from darkened eyes. However, when we actually encounter the Titan, it is not shaped from the darkened eyes that we see throughout the chapter. Also, as this neat note on the side explains, their malice implies darkness itself is evil, but the Dark Fountains themselves display no sign of malice, which is weird. Except for the fact that they do. Because King and Queen, they act more evil near the fountain. So the Sweet Captain Cake say that the Queen was always crazy. She just got even crazier after the fountain appeared. And the King does act a lot more subdued in the cage away from the fountain. Also, we have a sound near the fountain called gallery playing, which is very, very interesting because it implies like someone's watching. And the darkness itself is malicious. So I think the idea that I'm getting at here is that the darkness itself is malicious. It has the same energy that constitutes the fountains in the Titan. And the Titan is just like a form of the darkness that is from the maliciousness inherent to the darkness. And now also, I know it is not explicitly stated in any actual in-game material, but everybody likes to refer to this very neat Toby Fox interview. I would open it, but I feel like that would be annoying to format, but just know that if you were to find this link and go to the 3-hour mark, you would find Toby saying that the fountain definitely changed the king's behavior. So what I think the deal with darkness is that there is a realm of anti-light under the real light world, that when dark worlds are formed, flow that darkness into the world, creating a dark world. There is an inherent maliciousness or malicious entities that inhabit the darkness, which mean that when enough darkness is able to be given, a fully fledged Titan can form. But when there is only one dark fountain, there can only be so much darkness in the world, resulting in only one Titan forming. Or not even a Titan, just a malicious entity being there. And keep this in mind. This is very important for later. So, I guess I can now go on to what the deal with the night is. So, if we look at the night, they are seemingly made of darkness. See, they have the same dark imagery as... They have the same pure dark with a white outline as the Titans, and their blade is made of shadow crystals. For when you chip it, you get a shadow crystal in a thing called a dark shard. They're implied to be far weaker in the light world because of how Chris, very intentionally stops you from seeing the night in the light world and how the night needs to hide in the church closet. That is a very obscure piece of evidence that I just recently learned, though, so I do not have the dialogue in the slideshow. I'm sorry. And their weapon resembles a bat or a katana, depending on what angle we look at it. So, who is the knight? They have a horn. They have horns and face kind of rounded, like a deer. We know that it's not armor because they do this, which doesn't seem like armor to me. The weapon either indicates Des or Carol, because if we go up here, this looks very katana-y, but if we go down here to this real picture I took in the game at a very bad time, you can see it very much resembles a bat. And both Des and Carol are very strongly set up in Chapters 3 and 4. So, it's not Carol. It's Des. See, Des has enough narrative mystery around her to fit into the role. She has the opportunity to gain the weird darkness power that the Knight has, whereas Carol is so present in the light world that we have no reason to believe she would have any opportunity to become this in the dark world. Also, Carol does seem likely. She is obviously the mystery caller that we see on the phone, of course, because when you call, it says, "Oh, Susie has the guitar, I'll be right over." And then Asgore shows up, but we know that Asgore has always been in the house. If we look in the vents, he was cleaning the bathroom. And then Carol shows up, despite everybody saying, "Oh, I thought you were supposed to be at work for the next 3 hours or so." And then Carol snatches the guitar from Susie. So it is very obvious that she's at least the mystery caller. But Carol talks about the Dark Worlds, of course, on the phone. But she is too busy to make the church Dark World because we literally just saw her And as I just said, there is no explanation for weird power over the darkness, other than I guess she just was there for a while. But we already know she's obsessed with her work, so I don't think she has an opportunity for that. But also, the Knight can't be Des, because clearly, look at them. They are literally this Titan right here, but just a lot smaller. Like, just look at it. Okay, so in all seriousness, the Knight's dark element, because we know that the the Shadow Mantle, which protects against Dark Star, protects us against the Knight. And their weapon also does dark damage, which attacks Titans very well, which will also be very interesting in the next confrontation. And we know that Des isn't nearly as evil as the Knight seems to be. The Knight seems to be just very, very malicious, whereas Des doesn't seem to have that. At least not yet. But we know it also can't be a Titan, because it opens fountains which require determination, which is a thing that is needed by consciousness, which Titans do not have. The Knight spares Krish, which again, Titans just seek to destroy, and the Knight is far smaller than a Titan, which is literally like one of the few things we have set in stone, is that they are gigantic. And they're also very clearly Des. So I believe the Knight is both. This will seem very leap and logic-y, but a lot of theories I'll get into in the future will surprisingly give a lot more context for these. So I believe that Des fell into the depths. Des was the person in the code. She is talking in the depths. The scratching she hears in Chapter 2 is, of course, her talking about the malicious entities that seem to populate the depths. And she most likely fell through the bunker, which is the Knight's main base. And I think this is likely because her guitar actually does have the bunker code in it, and not just like the mayor. So it is likely that through the mayor, Des learned about the bunker code, and that's how she fell into the bunker. Whereas also the Knight's main base, that's where they go to at the end of Chapter 3. So it is likely to me that she sort of merged with the unformed Titan in the depths. That is how she sort of has the consciousness of Des. She sort of has the traits, but she's a lot smaller than a Titan. She is made of darkness, has all that darkness power, and it's also just why the Knight seems like a mix of both. It seems like a very strong way to set up the Knight, in my opinion. So yeah, so the Knight is when Des fell into the depths, merged with a Titan, left the depths to become the Knight, and is now working with Chris and Carol because of their connection to Des. Now, speaking of the people working with the Knight, now that we know what the Knight is, let me ask, if they're not the Knight, what do Chris and Carol have to do with anything? So, let's go over a few things about Chris and Carol first. So Chris, we know, seems to have minor violent tendencies, at least from their past. This we can know from the Chapter 4 Egger, which I will get into later, but essentially a NPC just says, "Welcome to Art Club, where we draw and don't kill each other." They also seem to have a traumatic event with the bunker in their past, as seen in the Chapter 2 shelter cutscene, and they assist the Knight and are even spared by them at the very end of the secret boss Knight fight, because Chris is made to kneel and not swoon. The mayor, we know, likes to preserve things. From what Rudy and Noelle say about the snowflakes that the mayor had bronzed, she has a conspiracy board in her room. If we light everything up, the majority of the room is blacked out, but the conspiracy board is left open. And we can assume that she fired Asgore, and this is likely because he failed to find Des. I'm not quite sure why I put like a mini theory on this information slide, but we'll go with it. So, this is kind of a cut case by now to the fan base, but who's on the phone? So, the caller says that they'll be right over, and then Carol arrives at the house. They also do arrive in the weird route, though, even when you shouldn't, or even when it is not shown that you called the mayor. And we also know that it's not Asgore, because some people thought, oh, Chris has the caller say, "I'll be right over," and then Asgore appears. But Asgore was actually there even before, because we can see him in the bathroom, in the vents. And in the weird route, the caller also says that Noelle is looking forward to seeing us in the festival, which Asgore probably wouldn't know. Furthermore, as you can see here, as you know, you are welcome here anytime, Chris. This is a very normal image with nothing at all changed. So we can infer that the caller is Carol. So why are Chris, Des, and Carol all working together? Well, Chris, I believe, was involved in Des falling into the shelter as a kid, and now seeks to make amends by working with the knight. And after investigating obsessively, as evidenced by Carol having that corkboard and seeming very interested in Des's disappearance, because of course she is her daughter, Carol learned about how Des was the knight and seek to preserve her much like she did in Noelle's Snowflakes by impeding the fun gang, as in stopping Susie from finding the shelter code, and also working with some plot with other people to help Des maintain her existence. I'm sorry that I blinked there. I'm probably going to have to edit this out. But also, Asgore's here too, because we see that he's working in Carol's house. That's what he arrives for, after all. And if we follow him in the bathroom, we can actually see that he goes to the mayor's room. And he says a bunch of interesting things. He says that everybody's going to see that he's right. They're all going to see it. He says we'll all be a happy family again, won't we? And he also comments on how beautiful it is, this black shard, which implies either the shadow crystal or the black shard weapon that the knight drops. Either one are very, very interesting. Carol also treats him kindly while yelling at Susie, and he also, as I said, talks about everyone seeing he was right soon, so it is very heavily implied there's more going on with Asgore. We also see this prophecy image right here that says the fireman trapped in asylum, implying that Asgore is very important, and will probably be, as everyone has figured out by now, the man who instigates the Chapter 5 Dark World. Hello, cat. Hello. My cat's very clingy, and she's trying to get onto my lap right now. Yes, Penny, we know you are the knight. So, they're also working with... So, Asgore found the truth about Des and did something bad to protect everyone, probably from the Dark World or from Des, as the knight. And now he's working with Carol to show everyone he was right, to get back together with Toriel and make everything normal again before Azriel gets home. He has a big corkboard in the back of his shop, which you can see in chapters 2 and 4. And also, it might be that they took Undyne, the knight did, to leave a convenient spot open for Asgore to return to Chief of Police. So here's our general idea of the Night Conspiracy. Chris is responsible for Des's disappearance and works with them and Carol to make amends for whatever event happened in their past. Carol found out about Des and wants to protect her and bring her back at all costs, employing Asgore to help in some ploy to do so. Asgore learned about Des long ago, but was laughed at, fired, and probably divorced, and now works with Carol to get back to normal after, again, doing some weird plot. So, before I go on to the next thing, I would like to say that I was not able to figure out what this plot may be, but the best idea I have is that it might be some sort of sacrifice, maybe with Undyne to mayhaps rid the darkness of Des and maybe put it on Undyne. And that might be why the color says police ... sacrifice ... next week. But anyway, speaking of Chris, because they have by far the least evidence of any character in this whole French flag thing, let's talk about Chris's backstory. So what do we know about Chris? We know they work with the knight, sort of violent past event, as evidenced by this very, very interesting dialogue from the Shadow Mantle creature, or ERAM, or whatever you want to call it. They're scared of the bunker, or scared of the bunker, as we know from Chapter 2, and they even went to therapy at some point. They also saw something behind a tree in the light world around when Des disappeared. This is a bit of a leap in logic, but I'll get into why I believe all this in just a second. So let's talk about the tree. We know Chris saw something behind the tree because we know from the Chapter 4 egg room that they went to therapy, and in therapy they say, "Welcome to Art Club, where we don't kill each other. And to get the Shadow Mantle, you must destroy trees that are very, very reminiscent of the trees that man hides behind and gives you the eggs in." The man is in both the light and dark worlds. He usually can't talk except in the Chapter 3 egg room. It's very mixed up and talks about the nature of the world. It may teleport in order to appear in the dark worlds, and talks about how Chris has forgotten him multiple times. I should also say, I believe that Chris has seen the tree in the light world, not just because they go to therapy in the Chapter 4 egg room, but also because they start by drawing. Well, it is said that they draw a tree and what they see behind it. It is said that they draw what they saw behind the tree. So, yes. Thank you, me. That explanation was completely irrelevant. The next slide went into it. So, they had begun by sketching what they had seen behind the tree. And then they talk about how they couldn't quite get it right, so they erased and then scribbled over and over and over until the surface of the canvas was nothing more than a monochrome smear. The monochrome nature is a bit interesting because it is reinforced and might mean that the man could be a goner. So, what do we know about the goner? Well, the goner usually couldn't be able to talk, given it literally has no mouth. They're very monochrome. They're very, very gaster-coated. Which I should say, the man is too, because Gasser's theme is in Waltz of Sekal Masada, and they talk about the nature of the world being like a game. The vessel you could describe as looking human, man being a word that is often used to describe humanity. And we also know that goners probably can teleport, as evidenced by Clam Girl teleporting. It is implied that Clam Girl the entire time is a goner, then turns grayscale and teleports, which would give a good explanation to why the man can teleport and appear in the Dark Worlds. And also might explain why Sans can teleport, but I don't think that's something I can get into today. So yes, I believe that the man is a goner. So let's talk about what the man's deal is. So the man, long ago, was made by Gaster as a failed version of the vessel. He was discarded after the gifts that you give to the vessel, as in ambition and favorite food and all that, had gone awry and given it too much mind. As we know, because the man can talk and very clearly has references to Chris in a way like they had some sort of relationship. The discarded version of that vessel became the man behind the tree in the light world, which frightened Chris when they saw it to attacking the man, as we know, because Chris seems to have a violent history. The man was Chris attacked the man because they were a vessel, and then, that was super scary, seeing a monochrome version of yourself, and suppressed the memory and went to therapy. Again, the man was made inside the bunker, or shelter, as I'm trying to call it now. So what about Des and the bunker? We know that Chris feels responsible for Des's disappearance. We know that Chris, Des, Ezreal, and Noelle went near the bunker in the woods near there at some point. We know from earlier that Des fell into the depths, and we know that the bunker may house the depths, is where the knight resides, and Chris has trauma with the bunker, which, again, I wasn't able to get into in the Chris section of this, so let's get into that now. Chris, one day, while exploring with everyone, saw the man, who was a discarded crystal, which scared Chris into attacking it. Chris had to go to therapy for this, blah 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 blah. And, again, one night, while near the bunker, Des and Chris got spooked by another vessel, which made them run away, which made Chris run away. But Des didn't. Des was left in the bunker as she fell into the depths, but Chris, scared from the trauma of seeing the man again, was not able to help. And now Chris feels responsible for Des's disappearance and helps the new Des however they can. So let's get into the shelter's deal. The shelter has 3 codes. 1 pine tree, 1 police badge, and 1 Deltarune. It has a dark fountain within. We know it's where the knight resides. And Des's guitar has a code 1225, which spells December. It resembles an old storm shelter, and Muse_Smile plays near it at negative 666 speed, which very, very heavily implies Gaster. So when was this built? Well, it seems to be an old abandoned storm shelter. The pine tree, which references the holidays, implies it wasn't built too long ago. And the rumors of it, though, imply it wasn't built super recently either, so maybe in the last 40 years. The rumors do imply that Gaster was also there for a while, so whatever strange event happened with it wasn't recently, as much as my slides may beg to differ. So what about Des? Well, we know there's a code in the guitar. Chris knows this code, as we see at the end of Chapter 3, and Des, as the knight, resides in the bunker. Des probably found the code via being the code holder's, Carol's daughter, and so she and Chris maybe one day explored the bunker. This explains why Chris knows the code now. And so, here is a very annoying to explain diagram I've made. So let's start by talking about the code. The code is shared between the mayor, the church, and the police. The mayor, of course, probably just has it herself, but the police implies Undyne or, as I forgot to link, Asgore. I do not believe Undyne is connected to the code, though, because the code was given out a while ago, so it's probably implied that Asgore has the code, which fits into why he is the, again, Chapter 5 Dark World instigator. Undyne was brought into the shelter, though, which I originally thought had weird implications given I thought she had the code, but it doesn't seem like any more is going on with Undyne in the shelter than that. The code, again, connects to the shelter, which connects to Des. Des has the code, which seems to be 1225, or maybe just part of it is 1225. However, we know that Des is also connected to the shelter via being the knight. We know that the shelter is connected to Gaster and Darkness, and Des is also connected to Darkness. Des is also connected to the depths via falling into the depths. The depths are connected to Gaster via being connected to Darkness, and Des is also connected to Gaster via having Gaster's theme in Lost Girl. This seems to me to imply, through this weird level of logic, that the depths are connected or inside the shelter in some way. And that the whole idea of Darkness is very heavily shown through Gaster and the shelter. And the shelter will be when we get our real big answers in there. So to say whatever I might have misspoke, Gaster resides in the shelter. The shelter code was given to the mayor, Asgore, and Alvin, which also is why Alvin very much diverts the question when we ask him about the shelter. He says, "Shelter? Why do you need to know about that? I pray that whatever you're going through, the angel's lights your way." He says something along those lines. I shouldn't have tried to directly quote. But anyways, so yes, all they had the code. Des also had the code, and Undyne is in the shelter, and Darkness is in the shelter, and we're all gonna have to go into the shelter. So here's what I think the shelter is like. You have just a regular dark world in it, but then inside the shelter, this deeper depths dark world, which is where Gaster and Des reside. So now that I've figured out generally what I think the whole deal with the bunker is, our last question that I need to answer is, what does the prophecy even mean? Well, first we need the prophecy to figure out what the prophecy is. So, let's look at it. So, I've divided this up into main parts and weird sideways in between parts because we do seem to have the whole main prophecy, but maybe not some of the smaller bits. So, let's read it. The prophecy which whisper among the shadows, the legend of this world. Deltarune, a world basked in purest light. Yes, beneath it grew eternal night. If fountains freed the roaring cries, and tightened shape from darkened eyes, the light and dark both burning dire, a countdown to the earth's expire. But lo, in hopes and dreams they send 3 heroes at the world's end. The first hero, the cage with human soul and parts. The second hero, the girl with hope-crossed heart. The third hero, the prince alone in deepest dark. And last, too, was the girl. At last was the girl. They'll hear the ring of heaven's call. They'll see the tail of hell take crawl. The last prophecy, the story's end. And then, when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save worlds, there is only one way. That's hyperlink blocked. Only then will the worlds be saved. And also, the angel banished will finally meet with its desire. So here's all the in-between stuff. Mostly, this is just it saying, oh, I'm the prophecy. I know stuff. I've gone into other things. The only other thing I can say here is that the knight which makes with blackened knife shall duel with heroes strife by strife. Which, just implies that the knight has strife and isn't, like, some titan on its own, which we already kind of know. Also, Jockington does grow the beard. But we also know that the girl is the last prophecy before the last prophecy, the story's end, which is interesting. Speaking of the girl, who is the girl? Well, you think, oh, it's Susie, because Susie sees this and is like, oh yeah, I'm the girl with hope-crossed heart. And Susie does seem to embody hope-crossed heart. And even though other people have said that, it's Noelle, because, and at last was the girl, seems to be the Rude Buster. They look near identical, and they do seem to be different, judging by the chronology not matching up. The second hero, then the third hero, and then at last was the girl. But Hope-Crossed Heart doesn't really match Noelle, does it? And if it was Noelle, what sword would this be? The Twisted Sword? If it was Susie, what would it be? Like the pin that Gerson talks about her having? So it all seems very... There seems to be equal evidence either way, at least so far. So we might have to look at something else to see who it is. Oh, also, to further back Noelle, I should say that if you overlay the two images, they do seem to match up very well. Of course, the cape here is a bit more flowy, a bit more exaggerated, and there are no antlers. But of course that would happen. It is a prophecy mural, but they do line up very well, especially this hood part over here, the flowiness of the cape, the head shape, everything matches up. Whereas Susie, her clothes are very straight and very tight and don't seem to work with this image at all. The only thing that really works here is the head, but even Susie's hair in the image that I got is pointing up. So, it seems that this image is depicting Noelle, at least. Also, I did overlay the white cloak from the Shadow Mantle quest, but the cloak itself, or hood, I should say, doesn't match up nearly at all. So let's look back at that last prophecy. It says, love finds its way to the girl. The girl, which then transitions directly to the last prophecy, the story's end, which seems to imply that the girl would be mentioned here, but she isn't, so she'd have to be mentioned here, right? Well, what does this say? The girl with hope-crossed heart must be sacrificed. Which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Why Susie seems so mad at seeing this, if she thinks she's the girl with hope-crossed heart. Also, I am sorry, I forgot or lost the page where I found this prophecy. I will have to link the Redditor who made that in the description. But I do think this is a very neat, very good prophecy to fill it in. So, if the girl with hope-crossed heart must be sacrificed, what's that say about the girl? So, must we sacrifice Susie? Well, I'll say kinda thinks so, right? Well, if we look at this, it says there aren't anywhere I do anything cool, right? So Rouse here, of course, this conversation gets cut off by the old man, but Rouse here seems to be talking like he's avoiding it, like he knows something bad about Susie. But that doesn't mean that the girl is Susie. It just means that Rouse believes the girl is Susie. And we know that those aren't the same because Rouse here says, I deeply believe you two are the heroes of legend. So all we know is that a grim fate must befall the second hero. So who does that match more with? Susie? I mean, Susie would have a lot of thematic impact. Susie, after all, has the most screen time of any character, other than Chris, has a compelling character arc, Heart of Gold, and is everyone's favorite, and Chris doesn't really have much dialogue at all. They're kind of set up as a villain. But we don't have any sacrifice right now that would really work for Susie. It would seem very out of the blue, thrown in just to make things look good, if that makes sense. So maybe not Susie then. So what about Noelle? Well, Noelle's set up semi-majorly. We want to root for her because of her tragic backstory with deaths, Carol and Rudy. And so all those would make it have a lot of tragic impact if Noelle got sacrificed, right? And Noelle, well, she has a sacrifice set up in the weird route, of course. A very big, major sacrifice that would mean a lot for the worlds to only be saved with Snowgrave to happen. So maybe the sacrifice is Snowgrave, and Noelle is the second hero. So what about the first hero? The cage with human soul and parts. Well, the vessel, of course, is non-human, but has human parts and would have a human soul. But Chris is human. They don't have human soul and parts. They just are. So why not just call them a human? Well, it would if Chris was the hero. So it seems that the heroes here are the vessel, Noelle, and Rouse. As a bonus on what I wasn't able to get into about the prophecy today, I should mention Gaster. We have 3 heroes appear to banish the angels' heaven on the old Deltarune website from 2016, which is very, very interesting because it implies that Gaster almost wrote the prophecy, but this isn't a direct quote, but I can't get into that right now. And we also have the legend of this world, Deltarune. In Deltarune, it's made like in syntax, like with the triangle brackets and all caps, so it seems very, very gastery, but I don't know. I wasn't able to get into this, and from all the head scratching I've done in the much time between these slides and actually recording most of this, I have not been able to think of anything. So, to get into everything, darkness comes from a place called the Depths, with anti-light whose residents are unformed titans and their spawn, and the darkness itself is malicious because these inhabitants flow through the darkness as one thing. Des one day fell into the bunker, which was very unfortunate, and she also fell into the depths and merged with the darkness within it to become the night, a mixture of Des and a titan. Chris, Carol, and Asgore then are all working together with Des and the night to help free the real Des from it somehow. Chris because they feel guilty, Asgore because he wants to prove that he was right and make things go back to normal, and Carol because she wants to preserve her daughter, and you can't really blame her for that one at least. The man was also once behind the tree. Well, the man behind the tree was once a test for the vessel. Discarded, they scared Chris from behind the tree, and this made Chris attack them, which we know because Chris stabs with a sword on the way to get the Shadow Mantle, a tree that is very, very reminiscent of the tree that the Eggman hides behind. This resulted in Chris needing to go to therapy after seeing this man, and seeing another vessel in the bunker scared Chris way the heck out, and so they ran away from there. The shelter itself is an abandoned storm shelter, which was built a good bit ago, which was used by Gaster for experiments after it was abandoned, and installed with a lock that he gave the code to Carol, Asgore, and Alvin. He then, from there, experimented on Darkness, Goners, and the Depths. Des learned the code from her mom and shared it with Chris, leading to Chris fleeing the bunker and Des turning into the night. Finally, the prophecy describes the three heroes, the Vessel, Noel, and Rouse, and they shall be the ones to appear at World's Edge. Another thing I should say, you might have thought that this was inconsistent with how accurate the prophecy was for me to think that they were the wrong heroes, but they are only the heroes once the roaring happens. When low on hopes and dreams, they send three heroes at World's End after the Titans are freed from darkened eyes. So anyways, the Snowgrave route will be the sacrifice required to save the worlds, and that is why the hero with hope-crossed heart must be sacrificed. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and once I edit this all down and get everything to work, I hope you enjoyed my first video on my channel, and a bit of a deep dive into some of the bigger questions I've had, and I'm sure the community has had, regarding these next two insanely good chapters. Thank you for watching. Please say this actually recorded my voice this time and I don't have to do this all over again.